Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion this morning. We have a distinguished panel that has already been introduced, and we have half an hour to discuss the Arctic Public Square in Washington, D.C., which almost by definition is the Polar Institute at the Wilson Center, the nation's think tank. And then we have Q&A afterwards within the half an hour time limit. So the Arctic Public Square, Senator Murkowski, can I ask you what is the significance of that in terms of general political work in DC, particularly in Congress? You were quoted when it was established in 2017, finally it's here. So could you tell us about the importance of the Institute for your work, for example?
Well, it's not just about, first, Gerhard, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with good colleagues. It's not just about the Wilson Center, as significant as that center is to the Arctic conversation, but it is the fact that we have a venue, we have a place where Arctic discussions are welcomed, are encouraged, and really viewed in the significant role that they should be. When you think about it, Washington, D.C. is not proximate to the Arctic. So our center of government in the United States is geographically kind of displaced from that conversation. And so to have again, whether it's the Wilson Center or many of the other think tanks that have helped to facilitate the Arctic conversation over the years, this is where I think we see the strength and the power of what the Wilson Center, and more specifically the Polar Institute there, to bring thought leaders together within the United States, but really more globally, to focus on issues of village relocation, to focus on matters related to indigenous peoples, to focus on matters of the economy, the environment. This is where it comes together, and we need to have that venue. So it has been significant from an elected member's perspective, because it's a resource for us, it's an educational opportunity, and it's a convening space.
Mike, you are the founding director of the Polar Institute. Can you elaborate on what Senator Murkowski just said in terms of the work and the direction of the Institute?
Well, I will. I would also, Senator Murkowski is very supportive of our work. I know Meet Treadwell's out here somewhere, Alice Rogoff, President Grimson, Tero, lots of friends helped to build what is now known as the Polar Institute. But as the Senator said, our vision was to create the environment for these kind of discussions. We're maybe Washington, D.C. and the Polar Institute, we're a near Arctic city, maybe, or a near Arctic institute. But the idea was to draw to Washington, D.C. all of the issues related to the Arctic, sort of the kaleidoscope, as the Senator said, of issues, not just issues related to great power competition or climate, but reflect the Arctic in Washington, D.C., and then for us to reflect what Washington, D.C. might or might not be thinking back out to the Arctic community. So it really was to create the place and then have the Arctic inform what happens there, but also listen to the Hill, listen to Washington, D.C., and try to understand the gap between what is known about the Arctic in Washington, D.C., which, depending on who you're talking to, a lot or not enough, and then trying to accommodate that difference, right? Being in the breach of that to communicate both ways. So lots of people in Washington, D.C. understand that there's an Arctic, sort of. They think my own home state of Alaska is, their reference point is a map, a weather map. So we're someplace off the coast of California on a weather map. And so that's not helpful in terms of perspectives. So we have to do very basic education, but then how is the Arctic interconnected to the rest of the world? And what the Senator said before is exactly right. We created a place for these types of discussion, along with good policy work being done. So that was the idea 4 years ago. I think we've had great success, but success has come with Arctic Circle Assembly, Munich Security Conference, the other think tanks in town. It's not just been us.
Ambassador Green, you are the new director of the Wilson Center. How do you see the Polar Institute and its work going forward in terms of the overall mission of the Wilson Center?
Well, again, thanks for the opportunity to be here and share the stage with these longtime champions of the Arctic Circle and the work that brings us all here. So to build on what the first two speakers have said, something unique about the Wilson Center, we're actually part of the Smithsonian Institute, and a lot of people don't realize that. And we have a mission given to us by Congress. Our job is to strengthen the relationship between the world of learning and the world of public policy. And so that means in the work that we do, we don't simply push out data, we don't simply push out information, although we do that like others do. It's instead to apply lessons, knowledge, scholarship, what we learn, and to tee it up for policymakers. We never tell policymakers what to do or what to say. That wouldn't work very well. But what we do is provide well-reasoned, verifiable options to empower them to make some of the tough choices that have to be made. And so that really is the mission of the Wilson Center and the Polar Institute, and the topics which bring us here today are made to order for that. It matters to us because the challenges that we're all talking about really represent a microcosm of very important global challenges. The fact that the Arctic region is warming 3 times faster than the global average, you could say it's the canary in the coal mine if you want to, but more significantly, it tells us instantly what we have to worry about. It shows us the warning signs. And on the positive side, it also shows us the opportunities. Because if we collectively can take on some of these challenges, then maybe there's hope for the challenges that we have to take on globally. And then finally, and Mike and the Polar Institute put out a paper, The 7 Cs of the Arctic. 2 of their Cs fit together, cooperation and competition, and that's the other part that's important in our work. Right now, we see this as a region, a vitally important region of cooperation, where we need to come together to take on opportunities and to avoid darker consequences and see what we can do together. But we also realize that if we fail on cooperation and are not successful, we could see it slip into competition which may not be conducive, may not help us in all that we seek to do. So the role of the Wilson Center is to be that place where multiple points of view come together, information comes together, lessons learned and brought forward to policymakers, not just US policymakers, but global policymakers.
Senator Whitehouse, you told us yesterday about your interest in the oceans and how relevant ocean issues are for your home state of Rhode Island. And I know you've been involved in passing several bills through Congress related to saving our seas, etc., among others with Senator Sullivan of Alaska. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the need for economic development and the need to preserve the environment in these pristine areas? This is a natural balancing act, but can be very hard. So could you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think what interests those of us who are from non-Arctic states is seeing the changes that are happening, and some of them are commercial. Chinese interest in polar shipping routes, Russian exertion of sovereignty in areas where there hadn't been an opportunity for contest before, and as Mark said, watching the leading edge of climate change, which is impacting the Arctic and Antarctic regions much more strongly than more temperate regions at the moment. So it gives us a window into all of that. And as we are trying to measure just how catastrophic climate change is going to be on our Earth's operating systems, the economics of that become pretty self-evident. Economic life in a world that is stable and that is environmentally safe and that supports sustainable human life is one thing. Economic life in a world in which systems are changing and collapsing and there are new conflicts emerging and resources that used to be available are collapsing is a very, very different world, and it's a very unpleasant world, and it's a world much more driven by seizing what you can to protect your country's interests than it is about joint economic cooperation and development. So that's the perspective I think that many of us bring to this, the canary in the coal mine, as Mark said, or the, as we say in American movies, the preview of coming attractions.
Great. Let me turn to you, Heiðar. You are the Vice Chairman of the Arctic Economic Council. How does this balancing act between economic development and preservation of the environment look from your perspective on the Council?
Yeah, thank you. It actually looks quite good to me. There has been fantastic initiatives like with the Wilson Center. I will name the Arctic Infrastructure Inventory, which is out there for everyone to see, because there are like common misconceptions about the Arctic, that it's pristine, untouched, no one lives there. But this is actually a summary of all the big projects which are taking place there. And there's a lot of pan-Arctic collaboration that can be done. And it's also worth mentioning that there's no other area in the world which can boast of the same track record as the Arctic in being sustainable and responsible in its economic development. But there are all kinds of issues coming up. For instance, we heard about the new EU Arctic policy, which I'm not very fond of. But for instance, Senator Murkowski, which has been a great supporter of the.arctic.circle, being here since inception for every single conference, I would like to ask her to give us a little hand in that, because she's also the vice chair of the Arctic Parliamentarians group. So now with the upcoming Norwegian chairmanship of the Arctic Council and the Arctic Economic Council, if the Arctic parliamentarians could give us a hand in bringing the right information out. And I'm extremely happy how much the Arctic issues have been raised in Washington. And the Arctic people, and especially representatives like Murkowski, I can almost view you as a representative for all the Arctic people. We need the help of Washington to bring the right message out.
Well, thanks for those comments. I'm going to turn to Senator Murkowski, but I'm thinking back at the question raised yesterday by Mead Treadwell here from the audience about the European Union Arctic policy, and he said, well, looks like you want to put us out of business because you want to close down all our basic industries. So, Senator Murkowski, is that a correct statement? I mean, doesn't there have to be an adjustment in the oil and gas sector in Alaska, just like everywhere else, because of climate change and the threats to the environment?
I think we all recognize that we are seeing, as we're seeing changes to climate, we're also recognizing that how we're able to access our resources in ways that are environmentally sound and safe and forward-leaning, that there are changes that are underway. I am always quick to point out that as much as Alaska is known for its oil resources, we are now becoming known for what we are pioneering when it comes to microgrids and our ability to provide for energy where the small, very remote, oftentimes, communities are, with a focus on renewables that will help to sustain them. So on the one hand, you have very much a resource base with your fossil up north, but that oil doesn't benefit that small village unless we get them off of the diesel that is currently powering them. And the way that we are able to do that is through a level of of wealth and a strong economy for our state to help transform their energy dependence to one of energy independence based on the renewables that they have. So the question that is asked is a fair one. Are we pushing those who are already most energy vulnerable into greater energy vulnerability when you say you've got to shut it all down, keep it in the ground, and the ability that you have had to generate any level of wealth, and wealth that brings to you schools, heating, really any level to participate in today's world. I mean, we still have communities where we struggle to have clean water or sanitation. And so as we look to these policies, these shifts in policies, I think we in the Arctic need to make sure that those who are most energy vulnerable are not made more vulnerable. And I accept the urgency that is in front of us with regards to climate change and how we address it. But let's not address it in a way that causes greater harm to those who are already very vulnerable.
Well, this is, I think, a very important point, and this is a relevant problem elsewhere in the world as well, in poor African countries, which have maybe only one resource, and that is maybe oil and gas. And do you really want to take it away from them, from the poor people who live there? This is a dilemma. And I wonder if we could have a comment from Senator Whitehouse about this.
Well, the thing about transitioning to a clean energy economy is that you can do it in ways that create very considerable revenues. The most effective response to climate change and to carbon emissions and to methane emissions is to put a price on it. So you can't just pollute for free. That also is economics 101. That's even conservative economics 101. That's Milton Friedman saying, yes, negative externalities have to be baked into the price of a product. So it's really important to separate the conversation, tackle the problem of climate change, and make sure we win that fight, because if we lose it, generations will hold us in contempt and disgust for our failure. From what we do with the revenues that make the solution possible, and there's where you go and use them to provide the help. We have an obligation to make sure that people don't suffer as a result, and whether it's people who've worked in mines and communities that have been supported by coal mining for generations, or whether it's Alaskan villages on the fringes of our technological network, or whether it's communities in poorer countries that live artisanal, close to the earth lives that are going to be completely disrupted. We do have an obligation there, but that obligation can't cause us to fail at our first obligation, which is to leave this planet to future generations in something like the way we inherited it ourselves.
Ambassador Green, you used to be the director of the U.S. Agency for International Development, and you must have been facing similar problems elsewhere in the world. Can you give us a comment on this particular point?
Sure. As I was listening to my two esteemed colleagues, this also presents opportunities. So as we take on, in a concentrated, focused way, the energy needs and energy opportunities for communities in the Arctic region, vulnerable communities, maybe that provides us with some of the lessons that we need to learn for application elsewhere. I've been struck in my time at USAID about frugal innovation, where communities struggling because they are disconnected from some of the larger technologies that are out there have found very innovative ways to boost their effectiveness, boost their efficiencies. They're just looking for a little bit of help and support in that work. And it strikes me that that's something that should be part of the work that we do. So again, we look at all of this and the issues that you've just heard as issues that we need to raise into the public's awareness now, immediately, because they're coming at us quickly. And if we aren't fully aware of the options and the consequences, we're going to make mistakes, and those mistakes are they're not easy to unwind. So for us, I think we mentioned this earlier, Wilson Quarterly, our award-winning publication that we choose to devote to particular issues, coming up this spring, we want to dedicate the entire issue to the New North and the opportunities that are there. And my two esteemed colleagues, I'm outing them, they've agreed to provide some of the scholarship that we hope to use to flesh out these very important issues for public discussion and debate.